Friends and family filled their spacious backyard, offering heartfelt toasts and warm smiles. It was exactly the kind of evening David had envisioned when he planned the anniversary party. Emily looked radiant in her elegant navy blue dress, laughing with guests and moving effortlessly from group to group. David's chest swelled with pride as he watched her. He had worked hard to make the evening special. Emily deserved it. "You've outdone yourself, man," David's best friend, Scott, said, clapping him on the back. David grinned. Only the best for her. It felt like everything in his life was exactly as it should be. A successful career, a beautiful home, and a loving wife who had stood by him through thick and thin. But in the back of his mind, a nagging unease crept in, though he couldn't quite place it. As the evening progressed, Scott noticed something that made him uneasy. He was standing near the patio, sipping his drink, when he saw Emily slip away from the crowd. She glanced over her shoulder as though ensuring no one was watching, then disappeared into the house. Curious, Scott followed her movements from a distance, wondering if she needed help with something. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Through the window, Scott saw Emily in the hallway, standing close, too close, to another man. It was Greg, a coworker of hers that David had never liked. They were talking in hushed tones, their body language unmistakably intimate. Scott's heart sank as he saw Greg reach out to touch Emily's face. She didn't pull away. "Unbelievable," Scott muttered under his breath. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and dialed David's number. David's phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting a conversation with his sister. He excused himself and stepped away from the crowd. "Scott? What's up?" Scott's voice was low and urgent. "David, I need you to come inside. Now." David frowned. "Why? What's going on?" "Just trust me. Come inside and go to the hallway near the living room." David's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" "You'll see," Scott said grimly. David hung up and walked toward the house, his heart pounding. The laughter and chatter of the party faded behind him as he stepped inside. When David reached the hallway, he froze. There, just a few feet away, was Emily, her hands on Greg's chest as he leaned in close. The intimacy of the moment was undeniable. For a split second, David hoped he was misreading the situation, but then Greg brushed a strand of hair from Emily's face and kissed her. The world seemed to stop. "Emily?" David's voice cut through the air like a blade. She jolted, turning to face him, her eyes wide with shock. "David, I can explain." David stared at her, his chest heaving. "Explain? You're kissing another man at our anniversary party. What the hell is there to explain?" Greg stepped back, his hands raised defensively. "Look, man, I think I should." "Don't you dare," David snapped, his voice shaking with anger. "You don't get to walk away from this. You knew she was married, and you did it anyway." Emily grabbed David's arm. "Please, can we talk about this privately?" David yanked his arm away. "Privately? No, Emily. Everyone's going to know exactly what kind of person you are." David stormed back outside, his face flushed with anger. The guests, sensing something was wrong, turned to look at him. Emily followed, pleading with him to stop, but it was too late. "Everyone, listen up," David shouted, his voice carrying over the quiet murmur of the crowd. "I have an announcement to make." Emily's face turned pale. "David, don't." "I just caught my wife," David said, pointing at Emily, kissing another man, right inside our house. At our anniversary party. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily's parents exchanged horrified glances, while Greg tried to slink away unnoticed, but Scott stepped in to block him. "You're not going anywhere," Scott growled. Emily's voice trembled as she tried to address the crowd. "It's not what it looks like. Please let me explain." David cut her off. "Save it, Emily. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. There's nothing you can say to make this right." The party quickly dissolved into chaos. Guests began whispering among themselves, some leaving quietly while others stayed to gawk at the unfolding drama. Emily stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as David glared at her, his rage barely contained. Scott placed a hand on David's shoulder. "Let's get you out of here, man." David nodded, his voice cold. We're done, Emily. I'm filing for divorce first thing tomorrow. Emily's sobs grew louder, but David didn't look back. He left the party with Scott, leaving Emily alone to face the judgment of their friends and family. That night, David stayed at Scott's house. As he lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the weight of what had happened began to sink in. His marriage was over. The life he had built with Emily was shattered. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let her betrayal define him. The following morning, David woke up at Scott's house with a splitting headache, not from alcohol, but from the emotional exhaustion of the previous night. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Emily and Greg in the hallway replayed in his mind. Scott handed him a mug of coffee as he sat down at the kitchen table. "How are you feeling?" David sighed, staring into the dark liquid. "Like my entire life just fell apart." Scott sat across from him, his expression serious. "I know this is going to be hard, but you did the right thing, calling her out. She betrayed you, man. That's on her." David nodded slowly, though the words offered little comfort. I keep asking myself if there were signs I missed. How long has this been going on? Did she ever care? Or was it all a lie?" Scott frowned. "You can't drive yourself crazy thinking like that. What you need to do now is focus on what's next. What's the plan?" David took a deep breath. "I'm filing for divorce today. I already made up my mind about that. But I need to know the full story first. I need answers." Later that morning, David returned to the house to find Emily sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as he entered, her expression a mix of relief and fear. "David," she said softly, "I'm so glad you're here. Please, can we talk?" "Talk?" David said, his tone icy. "Oh, we're going to talk. But don't expect me to forgive you." Emily flinched at his words. "I know what I did was wrong. I made a terrible mistake." "Mistake?" David interrupted. "A mistake is burning dinner or forgetting to pick up milk. You made a choice, Emily. You chose to betray me. So spare me the excuses and tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" Emily hesitated, wringing her hands. "A few months," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. David's jaw tightened. "Months? While I was planning this anniversary party, you were sneaking around with him?" Tears streamed down her face. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was feeling neglected, and Greg was there, and—" "Neglected?" David scoffed. "You mean while I was working late to pay for this house? While I was planning a celebration for you? That's neglect?" Emily sobbed harder, but David's anger didn't waver. "I gave you everything, Emily. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for, what? A fling with some guy who doesn't give a damn about you?" She tried to reach for his hand, but he pulled away. "I'm sorry," she said desperately. "I'll do anything to fix this. Please, David, don't leave me." "It's too late for that," David said coldly. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything we built together. I'm done." That afternoon, David met with a divorce attorney. He brought the video Scott had taken at the party, as well as the text messages Emily had accidentally synced to their shared tablet, messages that confirmed the affair had been going on for months. The attorney reviewed the evidence, nodding grimly. "This is solid," she said. "You'll have a strong case in court, especially since you have proof of her infidelity." David felt a sense of grim satisfaction. If Emily thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. As the news of Emily's affair spread through their social circles, the judgment was swift and unforgiving. Friends who had attended the anniversary party were appalled by her behavior, and many distanced themselves from her entirely. Emily's parents were especially furious. Her mother called her the day after the party, her voice shaking with anger. "How could you do this to David?" she demanded. "He's been nothing but good to you. Do you have any idea how ashamed we are?" Emily's attempts to defend herself were met with cold silence. Her parents made it clear that they were siding with David, leaving her feeling even more isolated. Even Greg, the man she had risked everything for, began pulling away. He stopped answering her calls and texts, and when she confronted him at work, he told her bluntly that he wasn't interested in a relationship. "I didn't sign up for this drama," he said with a shrug. You should have known this wasn't going anywhere. Emily was left alone to face the consequences of her actions. While Emily's world crumbled, David found solace in the support of his friends and family. Scott remained by his side, offering encouragement and keeping him grounded. Like the video to support David, David's sister, Sarah, also stepped up, inviting him over for dinners and making sure he wasn't isolating himself. "You're going to get through this," she told him one evening as they sat on her porch. "It doesn't feel like it now, but you will." David nodded, though the pain of Emily's betrayal still felt raw. "It just hurts, you know? I thought we had something real." "You did," Sarah said, "but she didn't value it. That's on her, not you." As the weeks went on, David began to focus on himself. He started going to the gym, picked up hobbies he had neglected, and even began therapy to process the emotional toll of the betrayal. Though the divorce proceedings were still underway, he felt a sense of control returning to his life. For the first time in weeks, he could see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. But the scars of Emily's betrayal remained, and he knew it would take time to fully heal. The fallout was only beginning. While David was working on piecing his life back together, Emily was experiencing the full force of the consequences her actions had set in motion. Her betrayal had shattered her relationships, tarnished her reputation, and left her feeling utterly alone. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. The screen was blank, no missed calls, no messages, no notifications. A week ago, her phone had been a lifeline, constantly buzzing with texts from friends, her family, and even Greg. Now, there was nothing. Her attempts to reach out to her friends had been met with curt responses or outright silence. Even her closest confidants, the ones she had thought would stand by her no matter what, had distanced themselves. "We just don't feel comfortable getting involved," one friend had said. Another had flat out told her, "What you did to David was unforgivable." Emily dropped her phone onto the nightstand and buried her face in her hands. She had never felt so isolated. As if the personal fallout wasn't bad enough, Emily's professional life began to suffer as well. News of the affair had spread through the office, thanks to Greg's loose tongue. Whispers followed her down the hallway, and colleagues avoided making eye contact with her during meetings. During lunch one afternoon, Emily overheard two coworkers talking at a nearby table. "Did you hear about Emily?" one of them whispered. "Yeah," the other replied. "Cheating on her husband during their anniversary party? That's low." Emily's appetite vanished. She stood up and left the cafeteria, her cheeks burning with humiliation. If there was one thing Emily had clung to after the fallout, it was the hope that Greg might still care about her. But that illusion was shattered when she confronted him at work. "Greg, we need to talk," she said, cornering him in the break room. He sighed, looking annoyed. "Emily, I don't think that's a good idea." "Why?" "You've been avoiding me all week," she said, her voice trembling. "Because this isn't my problem anymore," Greg replied bluntly. "Look, it was fun, but I never signed up for all this drama. You're on your own." Emily's stomach dropped. "You said you cared about me." "I said a lot of things," Greg said with a shrug. "But let's be real, this was never going to be anything serious." Tears filled her eyes as she watched him walk away without a second glance. Meanwhile, David's divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly, thanks to the mountain of evidence he had collected. The video from the anniversary party and the text messages he had recovered left no room for doubt about Emily's infidelity. When Emily's lawyer attempted to argue for a fair division of assets, David's lawyer countered with the evidence, arguing that her betrayal had voided her claim to any financial support. By the time the court date arrived, Emily had already lost her car and was forced to move out of their home. David kept the house, as well as the majority of their shared savings. The judge ruled overwhelmingly in David's favor, leaving Emily with little more than her personal belongings. With no savings, no home, and a tarnished reputation, Emily was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment in a less desirable part of town. The once comfortable life she had taken for granted was gone, replaced by a daily struggle to make ends meet. The humiliation didn't stop there. Everywhere she went, it seemed like someone recognized her. The whispers, the sideways glances, the judgmental stares, they followed her like a shadow. One evening, while grocery shopping, She overheard a young couple whispering nearby. "Isn't that the woman who cheated on her husband?" the girl said. "Yeah, at their anniversary party," the guy replied. "What a mess." Emily abandoned her cart and left the store, tears streaming down her face. For David, the divorce marked a turning point. While he still carried the pain of betrayal, he was determined not to let it define him. He focused on his career, throwing himself into projects and earning a promotion within months. He also began volunteering at a local youth center, teaching kids about perseverance and hard work. The experience was rewarding, giving him a sense of purpose that had been missing since his marriage fell apart. Though he wasn't ready to date again, David felt like he was finally starting to heal. As her life continued to spiral downward, Emily found herself reaching out to David in a moment of desperation. She left him a voicemail, her voice shaking as she spoke. "David, it's me. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I had to tell you how much I regret what I did. I ruined the best thing in my life, and I'll never forgive myself for it." David listened to the message once before deleting it. He didn't feel anger, just a hollow sadness for the woman he had once loved. While David moved forward with determination and purpose, Emily's life remained in free fall. The choices she had made, and the consequences that followed, left her with little more than regret and a lifetime of what-ifs. No way back. The fallout from the anniversary party had left an indelible mark on both David and Emily. While David worked tirelessly to rebuild his life and establish a new sense of normalcy, Emily sank deeper into despair. The consequences of her actions continued to ripple outward, leaving destruction in their wake. Living in her small, dingy apartment, Emily began to reflect on the choices that had brought her to this point. She no longer recognized the person she had become. The vibrant, confident woman who had once shared a life with David was now a shadow of herself. Emily decided she needed to make amends, not to win David back, but to ease the crushing guilt that consumed her every day. She wrote him a letter, pouring her heart onto the page. "David, I don't know where to begin because I know I can't undo the damage I've caused. I betrayed you, the man who loved me, supported me, and gave me everything. You didn't deserve what I did to you. There isn't a day that goes by when I don't regret my actions. I've lost everything, our life, our home, our friendship, and it's all my fault. I hope you're finding happiness again, even if it's without me. You deserve that, more than anyone I know. I'm so sorry for everything. I will carry this regret with me for the rest of my life. Emily." She mailed the letter, not expecting a response. David's life, while not without its challenges, was steadily improving. He poured himself into his work and his volunteering, finding solace in the connections he was building with others. At the youth center, he became a mentor to a teenage boy named Kyle, who was struggling with low self-esteem after his parents' divorce. David saw a bit of himself in Kyle, the pain of betrayal, the feeling of being unmoored, and he made it his mission to help the boy find his confidence again. For the first time in months, David felt like he was truly making a difference. When Emily's letter arrived, David hesitated to open it. Part of him wanted to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of him. As he read her words, a mix of emotions washed over him: anger, sadness, and, surprisingly, a small flicker of pity. He could tell she was genuinely remorseful, but her apology didn't change what had happened. He placed the letter in a drawer, deciding not to respond. Greg, the man at the center of the affair, had managed to avoid much of the public fallout that Emily endured. But his reputation at work had been tarnished, and whispers about his involvement in the scandal had spread throughout the company. Eventually, the pressure became too much. Greg resigned and left town without telling anyone, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived in Emily's life. For Emily, Greg's departure was the final nail in the coffin. She had sacrificed everything for a man who had never truly cared about her, and now she was left with nothing but regret. At the urging of his therapist, David decided to attend a social event hosted by the youth center. It was a casual fundraiser, with food, music, and plenty of opportunities to mingle. Though he was nervous at first, David found himself relaxing as the evening went on. He struck up conversations with several people, including a woman named Claire, who volunteered at the center. Claire was kind, intelligent, and easy to talk to. They spent most of the evening chatting, and by the end of the night, she gave him her number. For the first time since his marriage had ended, David felt a spark of hope for the future. Emily's life continued to spiral downward. Her job performance suffered as she struggled to focus, and her boss began to notice. During a performance review, he didn't mince words. "You've been distracted and inconsistent," he said. "I understand you're going through a tough time, but we need people who can perform at their best. If things don't improve, we'll have to reconsider your position here." The warning sent Emily into a panic. Her job was the only thing keeping her afloat, and losing it would mean losing the last shred of stability in her life. She tried to pull herself together, but the weight of her guilt and regret made it nearly impossible. One afternoon, as David was walking through the park near his apartment, he spotted Emily sitting on a bench. She looked thinner, her clothes wrinkled and worn, her expression hollow. For a moment, David considered walking past without saying anything, but something compelled him to stop. "Emily," he said. She looked up, startled. "David, hi." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment before David gestured to the bench. "Mind if I sit?" She shook her head, and he sat down beside her. "You don't look so good," he said, his tone neutral. Emily laughed bitterly. "That's an understatement." David hesitated before asking, "How are you holding up?" Emily sighed. "Not great. I've lost everything, David. You, the house, my friends, even Greg's gone. I don't know how to fix my life." David looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You can't change what happened. All you can do is try to move forward." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I don't even know where to start." David stood, his voice steady. "That's for you to figure out. But I hope you do." He walked away, leaving Emily sitting alone on the bench. That brief encounter was the last time David and Emily spoke. Their lives continued to drift further apart, each of them grappling with the consequences of her betrayal in their own way. David focused on building a new life, one filled with purpose and the possibility of love. Emily, on the other hand, remained trapped in a cycle of regret and despair, struggling to find a way out. Their paths, once intertwined, had diverged completely. David and Emily's lives continued on their separate trajectories, each haunted in their own way by the choices that had shattered their marriage. David found himself healing slowly, focusing on his career, his passions, and rebuilding his sense of self. Emily, however, was sinking deeper into a pit of despair as the consequences of her actions left her increasingly isolated. David's connection with Claire began to grow. Though he was initially hesitant to open up, her patience and kindness helped him lower his walls little by little. They started seeing each other regularly, sharing quiet dinners and long conversations. Claire wasn't pushy, nor did she pry into his past. She allowed him the space to heal while offering support when he needed it most. One evening, after volunteering at the youth center, Claire invited David to join her for coffee. They sat in a cozy cafe as rain drizzled outside, the warm atmosphere wrapping around them like a blanket. "You seem lighter," Claire said, smiling softly, "like a weight's been lifted." David nodded. "I think I'm finally starting to let go of everything. It's not easy, but I'm getting there." Claire reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You deserve happiness, David. Don't forget that." For the first time in what felt like forever, David allowed himself to believe her. While David was finding a sense of peace, Emily's life was continuing its downward spiral. The warning from her boss loomed over her like a dark cloud, and the mounting stress made it nearly impossible to perform her job adequately. Her financial situation had become dire. Between rent, bills, and basic necessities, she was barely scraping by. Creditors were beginning to call, and the fear of eviction hung over her like a guillotine. One afternoon, after another tense meeting with her boss, Emily returned to her apartment and sat on the floor, staring at the pile of overdue bills on the coffee table. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized just how far she had fallen. In a moment of desperation, she picked up her phone and dialed David's number. David was sitting on his couch, reviewing plans for an upcoming work presentation, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw Emily's name. For a moment, he hesitated. Part of him was curious about why she was calling, but another part of him knew that picking up the phone would only drag him back into a world he had worked so hard to leave behind. He let the call go to voicemail. When he listened to the message later, Emily's voice was trembling. "David, it's me. I don't know why I'm calling, but I needed to hear your voice. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do. I know I don't have the right to ask, but if there's any part of you that still cares, please call me back." David deleted the message. The rejection from David was the last straw for Emily. She had clung to the hope that he might still care, that there might still be some path to redemption. But his silence confirmed what she had already feared. He was gone for good, and she was truly alone. Her job performance continued to decline, and within weeks, she was called into her boss's office. "Emily, I'm sorry," he said, his tone firm but sympathetic. "We've given you every opportunity to improve, but it's clear that you're not in the right place to continue here. We're letting you go, effective immediately." Emily nodded numbly, unable to muster a response. She packed up her desk in silence, ignoring the pitying glances of her coworkers as she left the building for the last time. As Emily was losing her job, David was reaching a turning point in his life. He had been offered a promotion at work, a position that would require him to relocate to a new city. It was an exciting opportunity, and though the idea of starting over in a new place was daunting, it also felt like a chance to leave the past behind completely. David discussed the decision with Claire, who was supportive of whatever choice he made. "I think it could be good for you," she said. "A fresh start. New surroundings, new opportunities." David nodded. "It's scary, but I think you're right. It's time to move on." Emily's financial struggles reached their breaking point when she received an eviction notice. She had fallen months behind on rent, and her landlord had run out of patience. With no job, no savings, and no one to turn to, Emily packed what little she had left into a few suitcases and left the apartment. She found temporary housing at a shelter, but the experience was humiliating. Every night, as she lay on a thin cot surrounded by strangers, she thought about the life she had thrown away. The home she had shared with David, the love they had once had, the stability she had taken for granted. It was all gone, and it was all her fault. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. Please like, share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel.